Appendix 1. Developing the four foundations of mindfulness, a life free from suffering. From one perspective, the life of a human being can be described as a struggle for survival, stability and safety. From another perspective, however, each person searches for happiness and satisfaction. It is not only prosperous people who seek happiness. Those people who struggle with all their might for survival do so as well. No matter if one looks at a long period of time, say of developing a career and engaging in various activities, or if one looks at brief intervals of time, say of momentary movements and actions. The search for happiness is always an inherent part of life. This is true even if one is occasionally faced by challenging matters of conscience or ethics. In truth, the search for happiness over a long period of time extends from the search for happiness in each moment. In one's own daily life, one must take an interest in finding a way to experience happiness in every moment. One's search for happiness will thus be successful. If one is unable to experience happiness in every moment, the possibility of happiness in the long run will remain a vague hope. But if one is able to experience happiness in each moment, one's wish will immediately become fulfilled. And when external surrounding conditions are favourable, one's happiness will only increase. The ordinary human process of seeking happiness, which is evident even in short-term or momentary periods of time, is such. Desire arises or is made to arise, and the person then acts in various ways to satisfy that desire. When there is gratification, the desire abates and the person experiences happiness. The more the desire is stimulated, the more intense is the gratification and pleasure. Happiness is thus the gratification of desire. We can then ask the question, what is desire? This question need not be answered directly. What is clear is that when desire arises, there are two significant manifestations. First is a sense of lack and deficiency, an absence of a desired object, either a true lack or one that is created in the mind. Second is a feeling of agitation or suffering, because one is hindered or one is pulled away from how things exist in that moment. One is unable to be at peace, and one must struggle to find a way to still the agitation. Only when desire is gratified does one feel back to normal, and does the agitation abate or stop. During this period of time, one experiences happiness, but if the desire is not gratified, one experiences a sense of loss, agitation, oppression, and affliction. Suffering, in fact, begins with the onset of desire, because desire is accompanied by agitation. Thus, the ordinary search for happiness is equivalent to inducing suffering and then looking for a way to momentarily alleviate it. Here, happiness is equivalent to the quenching of suffering. The more one induces the suffering, the greater the happiness when this suffering abates. Generally speaking, the time that elapses during the onset of desire, the subsequent lack and agitation, and the period of unfulfilled gratification is long, whereas the time of gratification and alleviation is fleeting. The life of human beings, which is a mixture of pleasure and pain, is thus full of suffering and nourished by hope. what is of graver concern is that there are many desires which remain unfulfilled, and for which there is no hope of fulfillment. There is thus a chronic and deepening suffering. When people grow impatient or when they feel hopeless, many of them will struggle in every way possible. If their suffering is not alleviated, they often vent this suffering outwards, creating greater problems for themselves and others. The matter does not end here. When people desire and act in order to fulfill this desire, they encounter obstacles, and in relation to others who have similar desires, they face competition. A life of desire necessarily includes irritation, anger, resentment, persecution, oppression, and distress, and is beset by problems stemming from such anger and oppression. The greater and more frequently one desires, the greater and more frequent is one's irritation and affliction. Please note here that desire here refers to the desire of craving. If one possesses wholesome desire, chanda, obstacles may even turn out to be fun. Worse than this, when one habitually entrusts one's happiness to desire and its gratification, later on, when one sees nothing worthy of desire, or desirable objects lose their appeal, and one is not actively searching for gratification, one is left feeling bored, apathetic, and disillusioned. Life becomes insufferable and meaningless. This is another form of suffering, but one which is insipid and wearisome. It may even be more discomforting than the suffering of waiting for sensual gratification. When people take refuge in desire and in pleasurable objects, entrust their happiness to gratification of desires, and create elaborate ways to fulfill desire, their suffering thus becomes more refined and complex. Such is a course of life based on suffering. There is an alternative way of life which is completely free from these problems mentioned above. Here a person truly lives in the present moment. One is aware of and fully awake to the things presently experienced. One knows and understands those things which must be engaged with in the present moment, and one deals with them accordingly. This is a way of living with mindfulness and clear comprehension, sati sampajana, or with mindfulness and wisdom, sati panya, in line with the teaching on the four foundations of mindfulness described earlier. Here mindfulness keeps pace with the present moment. One lives in the present. A person who follows this way of life is truly alive. Many people are not truly alive, because they either live in the past or in the future. When one lives fully in the moment, there is no sense of lack or deprivation, and there is an absence of stress from the constrictions and strains of desire. One experiences sense impressions in a full and complete way, and thus there is satisfaction in each moment. One does not rely on the happiness resulting from temporary gratification of desire and the alleviation of suffering. No suffering arises which must be brought to an end. It is a life free from suffering, an inherent happiness existing at all times. From a life based on suffering, one lives a life based on an absence of suffering, a life based on happiness. When one's life is based on an absence of suffering, if one wishes to experience a form of happiness that is within the limits of one's ability, one can enjoy this happiness to the fullest. Even if one occasionally seeks pleasure through the fulfillment of desire, this is not a problem, despite at that time there being a lack of gratification, because the latter happiness of non-suffering prevails and acts as a surety. Moreover, due to the absence of conditions giving rise to suffering and hindering the mind, such persons are ready to effectively solve problems externally, either those of an individual or of society, to the utmost of their ability. Technically speaking, the material in the preceding paragraph is a definition for cessation of suffering, nirodha. The correct definition for this term is to bring about the state in which there is no suffering that must be extinguished. That is, to bring about a freedom from suffering. This term does not merely refer to eliminating already arisen suffering. This corresponds to the appendix in chapter 4, discussing the difficulties of translating this term. The meaning of nirodha in the early text is the non-arising of suffering, not a cessation of already arisen suffering. Appendix 2. The 5 hindrances and the 7 factors of enlightenment. Each one of the hindrances and enlightenment factors are subdivided into 2 subsidiary factors, resulting in 10 hindrances and 14 enlightenment factors. 10 hindrances. 1. Internal sensual desire in reference to one's own body. 2. External sensual desire in reference to someone else's body. 3. Internal ill will directed at oneself. 4. External ill will directed at others. 5. Despondency, dina. 6. Sluggishness, mida. 7. Restlessness, udacha. 8. Anxiety, kucha. 9. Doubt concerning internal phenomena. 10. Doubt concerning external phenomena. B. 14 enlightenment factors. 1. Mindfulness of internal phenomena. 2. Mindfulness of external phenomena. 3. Investigation of internal phenomena. 4. Investigation of external phenomena. 5. Physical effort. 6. Mental effort. 7. Bliss accompanied by initial and sustained thought. 8. Bliss unaccompanied by initial and sustained thought. 9. Physical relaxation. 10. Mental relaxation. 11. Concentration accompanied by initial and sustained thought. 12. Concentration unaccompanied by initial and sustained thought. 13. Equanimity in relation to internal phenomena. 14. Equanimity in relation to external phenomena.